We're so fortunate to have our speaker this week. Our speaker is Dr. Chen, and she was born in China at the end of the Great Cultural Revolution. In the Cultural Revolution, education was considered the enemy, and Wen's parents tried to keep her from excelling in school. However, she excelled anyway, and she was able to go to a top university in China, followed by graduate school in the United States. Wen was awarded a PhD in biology at the California Institute of Technology, which we call Caltech, of course, here in our shorthand way, don't we? She now works at Caltech as a biologist and information scientist. Because of her personal experience of being brainwashed in China, she has become an activist for human rights in China, and she is determined to spread the world to the world about life in China. Since 2012, she has given hundreds of presentations to community organizations about Chinese culture, history, and society. Please welcome Dr. Chen.
Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here today. During the pandemic, I gave 2 via Zoom. I remember about 4 years ago, I spoke about human rights in China, and 2 or 3 years ago, I spoke about history of tea. Okay, my major is biology, and you may wonder why I speak so much about something not related to my field, right? So I make a living by reading. So I'm a scientific curator. I've been working for Caltech in the past 25 years. And my job is to read cutting-edge science literature, annotate the information, and extract the most important information into an encyclopedia. We build softwares to help people find this information. We also train artificial intelligence to read like us. So when I'm not at work, I use the same skill to read Mandarin because I was born and raised in China. I'm familiar with Mandarin. And I would craft talks about specific topics about China. As a matter of fact, every year for Caltech, my workplace, I craft a topic for the Lunar New Year. So history of tea was a topic, in one of those years, and I spoke about Chinese medicine and meditation. And today I'm very happy to share my knowledge, my annotation with you about the topic North Korea and China. So this is a satellite image of North Korea and China. And let me see if this works. Yes. So if you look at this area, this North Korea is all dark, and South Korea here and China there. The only dot that with light at night is Pyongyang. But Pyongyang is only a show city. Most of the Koreans in North Korea live a miserable life. And I think when you think about North Korea, the first thing, right, that came to my mind was a shortage of food. Because over 40% of North Koreans, they are starved. About 10% of population died in a great famine in the 90s. And the government of North Korea took all food from people, they distributed them, and most people got very little food. We're talking about like 4 ounces of food per person per day. And they also have this military first policy. So whenever they have food, they feed their military first, and then they feed the rest of people. So you can see most of people in North Korea do not get enough food. Because of a malnutrition, North Koreans, although they are the same, genetically they are the same as South Koreans, they are much shorter than South Koreans. And they have a much shorter lifespan as well because of the malnutrition. The whole country is a big labor camp. Basically, everyone do slave labor, and the money took everything. The government took all the money. And the government of North Korea also export slave labor to China and South Korea. So this is one of the pictures to the left. North Korean girls, oftentimes they would run restaurants in China, right? They would serve North Korean cuisine in China and also have performances at night. But the North Korean government took all the money they made. They had to live in a camp, like they were not allowed to talk to outsiders. The Chinese government would allow North Korea to run such restaurants. They also accept IT workers from North Korea to work in China. And just like restaurant workers, these computer programmers, they were also put in a camp, like they work as slave labor, like 6 days per week, or they're programmers for like 12 to 14 hours per day. The North Korean government took about 85% of their salaries. And there was some protest last year about this. So this is how North Korean government get foreign currencies by exporting their slave labor to China. And for about 12 years, on the border of North Korea and South Korea, there was an industrial region that allows South Korean companies to run their factories in North Korea, and they would use slave labor in North Korea to, they can make higher profit by using slave labor in North Korea. And also that allowed the North Korean government to get more foreign currency through this kind of export of slave labor. You can imagine, like with all this slave labor, like North Korean women, they are encouraged to have more children. And North Korean women, actually, the human rights there is much worse than many other countries that you heard about. I'm not sure if you heard about the pleasure squad in North Korea. So girls between 14 and 20 years old, they were selected and trained as entertainers for the Kim family and also for the high-ranking officials. They were basically provide sexual service, and they would learn how to dance and perform music to entertain the high-level officials. And they usually would retire at 25. They were ordered to marry like a military personnel. And you can imagine North Korea, they rely on slave labor to make money. So they do not allow women to have birth control. North Korea women are encouraged to have as much as 6 children because the country needs more slave labor. But they have to give birth to pure North Korean child. If any women got pregnant with a Chinese man or any man from other countries, they had to go through forced abortion because the North Korean government, they want to keep the Korean blood pure. So that's the concept of having forced abortion of women pregnant with foreigners. And religion in North Korea, of course, is banned. If you want to brainwash people, you cannot allow religion to really practice in this country. You probably know, like North Korea, like regard like a Kim family as gods, right? They actually do have some Buddhist temples that survived their religious persecution in the 50s. But nowadays, the government, they would employ people to act as monks in these temples. So they are not real monks. They are like people working in the temple. They dress and look like monks. They serve as tour guides in these ancient temples. And the media, internet, and cell phones in North Korea are highly censored or like blocked, you can say. About a quarter of North Koreans own cell phones, but their cell phone cannot make or receive international calls or send messages internationally. It's in the inside bubble of information. And of course, you cannot circulate any foreign media in North Korea. As a matter of fact, many North Koreans, they love South Korean drama, South Korean music. But if anyone were caught watching South Korean movies, they could be sentenced to death. And the North Korean government would have public execution as a warning to their people, like not to watch South Korean dramas, because they do not want any concept of freedom they do not want North Koreans to be exposed to any concept of freedom and democracy. And North Korean internet, they have a national intranet that like is run by the government. There were only like 5,000 websites run by the government, and these people cannot access outside the world. And about 1,000 people in North Korea, most of them work for the government. They can access global internet, but usually they access global internet to spread the propaganda of the North Korean government. Like they want to spread this propaganda on Facebook and Twitter, all this global internet. So this is like a very small percentage of people can see the outside world. And military in North Korea is probably beyond people's imagination because it's a very small country with about 26 million people, but about 6% of population in the military force. So it's the 4th largest military force in the world. As a matter of fact, the Korean War never finished because, it was just a temporary resolution, like they will cease the war. But actually nowadays, there are still 84 secret tunnels from North Korea to South Korea. In the wartime, these tunnels can transfer about 30,000 troops to South Korea within 1 hour. So actually, there's still a threat of war at that time. And you probably know North Korea owns nuclear weapon and chemical weapon. And you can imagine why such a poor country has so many nuclear weapons and chemical weapons. That's because China is a major sponsor of North Korea by providing nuclear technology and nuclear material. This woman, we call it Ma Xiaohong, like she was indicted by the US Department of Justice for exporting nuclear material to North Korea in 2016. And she worked with about 24 companies. They have this headquarters at the border of North Korea and China. They work together to export all this technology and the food and everything to North Korea. As a matter of fact, my husband used to work for one of those companies, and he visited North Korea in the 90s, and he told me that was a bad, terrible experience, like how bad the living condition there were. And the Harbin Institute of the Technology of China has been accepting students and scientists from North Korea and teaching them nuclear technology. So now I want to talk about the history of China. The reason the Chinese government spent so much effort to support North Korea is because they are both Communist Party countries, right? China also has a long history of human rights abuses. The first generation of Communist Party leader, Mao Zedong, he was famous for two big atrocities in China. The first was the Great Famine in the 1950s. And at that time, the government took all food from people, just like North Korea, right? They said they would distribute them equally, but they did not. Like they sold most of the food to exchange for weapons and other stuff. And about 30 to 40 million Chinese died from starvation during those 3 years. And the second largest crime committed by Mao Zedong was the Great Cultural Revolution. Those were 10 years in China between 1966 and 1976. Mao did not allow education in China because he believed that education can give people independent thinking, then they can criticize the government. So they shut down the whole education system in China for 10 years and killed over 2 million intellectuals. They also destroyed almost every piece of antique in China to eliminate traditional Chinese teachings because they saw that these traditional values is a threat to the propaganda system of China. And that's the first generation leader of the Communist Party in China. And the second, and at the same time, Mao Zedong, just like a Qing family, right, made himself a god during that time. People had to worship him. And he eliminated all religion and turned himself a god. And the second generation leader, Deng Xiaoping, was famous for the Tiananmen massacre in 1989. That was when students protested, asked for democracy in 1989. And at that time in Beijing, like people estimate about 10,000 students and the Beijing citizens were killed by the Chinese military. And it's still a taboo in China. We're not allowed to talk about it nowadays in China. These are all censored information. And the third generation leader, Jiang Zemin, was famous for the persecution towards Falun Gong. This is a Chinese meditation practice based on the principle truthfulness, compassion, tolerance. Falun Gong is practiced by traditional Chinese people for better health and to be a better person. The Chinese government actually promoted Falun Gong for quite a few years because they saw that this is traditional culture, helps the country to reduce the medical bill because it's so good for the health. But when they realized about 17 million Chinese practice Falun Gong in 1999, that's about 5 to 10% of Chinese population. The Chinese government ordered a massive persecution in 1999 because they think these people is growing large, they are independent thinking, and it will be a threat to the Communist Party propaganda system. So they started a massive persecution towards Falun Gong, and they detained millions of people in the past years. Most of the time, they have 500,000 Falun Gong detained at all times. Of course, they went through forced labor, torture, sexual abuse, mental abuse, and the worst crime was forced organ harvesting. The Chinese government started to take organs from death row prisoners in the 80s. They sentenced young people to death and kill them when hospitals need an organ. Then they found Falun Gong as a very good source of donors because there are millions of them. They meditate, they have better health than most Chinese people. So that has been a huge thing to the Chinese government to make money by selling innocent people's organs. When we talk about Americans waiting for kidney transplant, right? People usually have to wait for 3 years to find a matching organ, but they can go to China, they can provide you multiple organs within 24 hours because they already have Falun Gong, political dissidents, Uyghurs, and many other dissident groups detained, and their blood types tested and their DNA sequenced ready to match with patients. And you can say, like, with all these atrocities in China, right? How could the Chinese people still allow Chinese Communist Party to rule them? Like, why don't they rebel? That's because the brainwashing in communist China. I grew up in China until I came to the United States. I came in the 1994, but I did not know the Tiananmen massacre until I came because we lived in a bubble of propaganda. In China, all media are controlled by the Chinese government. And when I was in China, everything I learned about Tiananmen massacre was that the students on Tiananmen killed soldiers. That was what I learned. It's the opposite to the truth. And the government censored all books, every piece of art and film, and every post on social media. Of course, you cannot read any foreign media in China, right? They have a limited number of foreign films in the market, but they have to modify it to pass the censorship of the Chinese government. And Chinese internet is also like an intranet, but the government has better technology. They would selectively block many foreign websites like Facebook and Twitter, YouTube. You cannot see them in China. You only live in the bubble of the Chinese government. You can only see the websites that they allow you to see. And also China has over 2 million internet police. Their job is to check every user who, if you search in your home computer, right, you want to find out what is tankman. You type the keyword tankman in your home computer. The internet police will chase down your IP and find out where you live and come to arrest you within a couple of hours. And this is the amount of surveillance in China. Like China is the largest surveillance country in the world. The neighborhood committee in China has a very special function. They are usually formed by Communist Party members living in the neighborhood. They would monitor the activity of every household. If you ever say something wrong, if you ever do something they think, like it's not satisfied by the government, they would report you to the authority. And Communist Party chapter is required in every entity in China. We're talking about every school, every company, every business. You must have a Communist Party chapter after you grow to certain size, including Western companies operating in China. When we talk about Disney in Shanghai, Disney actually has a Communist Party chapter. And according to the Chinese law, Disney must pay for the operation of their Communist Party chapter. And according to the Chinese law, all foreign companies, after you are reaching certain size, you must have a Communist Party member sitting on your board to monitor the daily operation of your company. China has over 7 million surveillance cameras across the country, and they would watch everyone very carefully. They have such big data, and they have been cutting edge in inventing artificial intelligence, facial recognition to check all these messages, all these massive amount of information, and quickly identify who is against the government. Each Chinese has a social credit score that just evaluated based on your tax, your email, everything they monitor. They would evaluate how much you favor the Chinese government. If your score is too low, then you're like a travel code. When you get onto any transportation, they would check your barcode on your phone. If your social credit score is too low, you cannot travel anymore. Then automatically you are under house arrest. And that's because they can monitor everything, right? Including every cell phone, every computer you use. They monitor everything you do online. They know how much you favor the Chinese government. And unfortunately, these hardwares and softwares made in China, they do not restrict their function in China. If we buy them in the United States, like if you install TikTok, they would also collect information. and find out what you're doing and how much you favor the Chinese government. And Communist Party also distorted Chinese culture. Remember I said during the Cultural Revolution, they destroyed almost every piece of antique in China. But that's not sustainable. If you have no education, you shut down the whole school system for 10 years, the economy collapsed. That's when they ended the Cultural Revolution. But the party still regard traditional Chinese culture as a threat to their propaganda system. So the Communist Party invented another version of Chinese culture. They would use Chinese dance and music, Chinese art to praise communism. And they turned this into propaganda tools. Actually, the Chinese government formed many, many performing arts groups. They would tour all over the world. They do Chinese dance to praise the Chinese government, praise the communism. And they have been performing in American theaters all the time. And this is a big strategy they're doing, because by replacing the concept of Chinese culture and replace it with communism, right? They can reach such a propaganda, say, if you criticize communism, then you criticize Chinese people. Then you're anti-China, you're anti-Asian, you're Asian hate, you're racist. Like, this is very good strategy for them internationally, just make people impossible to criticize the Chinese government. When I first came to the US, I was very brainwashed. When my friends told me about Tankman, about the Tiananmen massacre, my response? I felt hurt, because I said, you're criticizing my government, then you're criticizing my country, you're criticizing me. I burst into tears. I was devastated because I saw that I'm part of the Communist Party. I saw the Chinese culture is communism. I saw that when they criticize communism, they are criticizing me and my cultural background. And this is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party want to make people think, because they use Chinese people and the government and culture, right, to prevent themselves from being from people talking about the history of human rights abuses. So speaking about North Korea again, we're actually in a battle with communism, because China would never allow North Korea to have freedom. They want to have an alliance of those totalitarian regimes. And they want to be the center of these totalitarian regimes by providing money and technology. And this is exactly what China is doing in the past 20 years. Besides North Korea, you probably know China has this Belt and Road Initiative. Here's the battle of China's Belt Initiative, like that covered over 150 countries around the world. And this is how Belt and Road Initiative works. Most of these countries are developing countries with financial difficulties. The Chinese government would approach them and say, we're going to offer you a huge loan to build your infrastructure. Oftentimes, they would bribe the elected officials in these countries by giving money to their personal account. These, if corrupted officials, they would sign contract, and then China would work on their infrastructure. These projects do not help local economy, because China sent everything from construction worker to construction materials. It do not help local economy. Then by the end of the project, these countries would receive a huge bill they cannot afford to pay. Then China will say, since you cannot pay, we're going to take over your infrastructure. We're going to control it for how many years. Once they control this infrastructure, right, they can expand their military influence there. Because if they control port, they can use it for military purposes, right? And this is how China expanded its military influence around the world. And that's how China controls the United Nations. Because in UN, the rule is that each country has one vote. Guess what? China has 150 votes all the time, right? Because these countries, they have China control their economy. They're like colonies of China. They always voted for the Chinese government in UN. Under the 15 major agents in UN, China officially leads 4 of them. And the other 11, China also holds important positions. Think about the World Health Organization during the pandemic. They just copied every word the Chinese government told them. They never did any independent research, because it's led by someone from Ethiopia. That's also in China's Belt and Road Initiative. And this is how Chinese government control the United Nations. Speaking about China's influence or impact around the world, I want you to remember one key message from tonight, is that China has national intelligence law. This is unique to, no other country has such a law, because this national intelligence law require all Chinese companies to submit data to the Chinese government. So when we talk about TikTok, we talk about all these popular Chinese apps like Temu and Chen, many Americans like to install them. Once you install TikTok on your phone, they take so much information that they can make a copy of your whole phone, including your clipboard that stored all the passwords of every account that you ever opened on your cell phone. No other app made in the US, you install Twitter, you install X or like Facebook, they will not take so much information. But think about it, once they take so much information, they have to make them accessible to the Chinese authority. Then you lose all the information to the Chinese government. And now we talk about hardwares made in China also has the same problem. Many hardwares nowadays are intelligent. If you think about a surveillance camera, drones, electric cars, intelligent cargo crane, they can all take information. They are automatic nowadays, take videos and pictures around the world. They have to be accessible by the Chinese government if these manufacturing companies are in China. So the Chinese government offered huge subsidies to their manufacturing companies to make a super cheap surveillance camera, super cheap drones and cargo cranes and electric cars, let them dominate the market. About 90% of surveillance cameras nowadays are made in China. Over 90% of drones flying all over the world are made by one Chinese company, Dajiang, DJI. And over 3/4 of cargo cranes are made in China by one Chinese company. Why cargo cranes are important? Because if you think about ports like Long Beach, right, a major port in West Coast, every day the cargo cranes tell what is coming in, where they are going to, and that can be remotely controlled by the manufacturing company. Imagine if we have a war with a country and the military base in China, in the US, right, need to have supplies shipping in. And the cargo cranes can know which one is going to the military base, and they can all of a sudden stop working because it's controlled by a Chinese government. So that's why we have all these national security issue with equipments made in China and softwares made in China. Besides that, we also have problem of spreading propaganda, because TikTok nowadays is used by over 50% of Americans. Americans rely on TikTok to get news, but it's a Chinese app. Of course, you will follow the censorship of the Chinese government. When you indulge yourself in the world of TikTok, you put yourself in a bubble of propaganda. And over the years, you become more and more brainwashed. And traditional media is also a big problem. This is a map of the Chinese government's business tie with over 30 mainstream media around the world. And their clients include the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times. You may think you never read advertisement. And here is an example of LA Times advertisement. That this issue was April 29th, 2020. That date, LA Times had 38 pages. 11 out of the 38 pages were called International Daily. They are paid ad in article format. Very few people can read the tiny font of paid ad, right? They say, oh, this is part of LA Times. All the articles were provided by the Chinese government. It was the beginning of the pandemic. Every article had the same message. The Communist Party took such a wonderful care of Chinese people, much better than American government. And communism was such a wonderful system to contain the virus. It was a much better system than democracy. So this is how the Chinese government used the credibility of our mainstream media to brainwash Americans. And Hollywood is another example. China is now the second largest film market in the world with 1.4 billion people. Every Hollywood film wants to enter the market to make money, right? 1.4 billion audience, that's big. But to enter the market, you must pass the censorship of the Chinese government. And you have to get the limited quota, because the Chinese government only allowed 10 Hollywood films to enter the Chinese market each year. Then you have to make their favorite films. So what is a favorite Hollywood film according to the standard of the Chinese government? If you think about big productions like The Martian or Gravity, when American astronauts got stuck in deep space, who came to rescue them? the Communist Party government, not me, ordinary Chinese people. The Communist Party government came to save their lives, right? Take-home message is that Communist Party is our friend. They came to rescue us whenever we are in trouble. And communism was such a great system. They have better technology because we cannot get our astronauts home. They have better technology. So communism must be a better system. So this is also the propaganda, the message that the Chinese government want to spread through our entertainment industry. And education is another example. Both of my children finished high school in public school in California. I was surprised to find out that the AP Chinese textbook they used was made by the Chinese government because College Board outsourced the AP Chinese textbook to the Chinese government. So our high school students have been using textbooks made by the Chinese government to study Chinese language. Also, over 100 universities in the US run this Confucius Institute. It's a free Mandarin program operated by the Chinese government. So the Chinese government would provide free textbooks and free teachers. Universities provide students and classrooms. But they teach the Communist Party's version of history. In Confucius Institute, people found this video about the Korean War. It said that Americans started the Korean War. Americans invaded North Korea, and then they wanted to invade China. That was a version of Korean War I learned as a student in China. But this is also the version students learned in Stanford, UCLA, UC Davis, because they run Confucius Institute. When students are enrolled in these universities, when they take Asian history, they learn it from their local Confucius Institute. And Chinese government also want to recruit American students to study in China. Oftentimes, they would offer full scholarship. You get, full scholarship, including a stipend to live in China. And then they can feed American students with, the propaganda version of Chinese history and give them a very good impression about the Communist Party. And that's also how they want to influence our next generation Americans. The Chinese government have been running overseas police stations in the past decades. Here's a map of the police stations. We know there are at least 100 secret police stations worldwide. At least 2 of them are in Los Angeles. Actually, FBI already charged at least 3 CCP spies in Los Angeles for threatening dissident groups and also manipulating elections in the United States. I know in Los Angeles, FBI charged a guy in Acadia in December for being a spy for the Chinese government and helping the Chinese government to get their favorite candidates to be elected. And this kind of manipulation of election also reflected the Chinese government's infiltration to the US government. They have been manipulating the election by threatening Chinese American organizations. They would force Chinese Americans to vote for certain candidates that are favored by the Communist Party. And after the election, the Chinese government actively invites officials to China with red carpet treatment so that they would have a good impression about the Communist Party. And we also have heard about Chinese spies working for these elected officials because often field representatives who can speak Mandarin, then that's a time when Chinese government would get their agents into this position. And so they have been doing this for many, many years, try to influence American people's mind, American politics. And the key reason is that the Chinese government has so much money. When we talk about China, especially nowadays about the tariff war, right? I want people to remember that China is a big labor camp. Even those who are not arrested, most of the products they made, are sold overseas. The workers made very little money. My husband's siblings in China, they are ordinary Chinese people doing average job. You never see them in the US because they make so little money. Their average monthly income is about $300. And you know how much a house costs in a big city in China? 30 million. So with such a low income, right? The same kind of job we need to pay $3,000 in the US, but in China, workers are only paid $300. Where did the money go if everything else is so expensive, right? The government took everything. The Chinese government took all the money so that they can buy our media, they can buy Hollywood, they can buy our university. And this is a key of the Communist Party. They were powered by trade, they are powered by money. And unfortunately, Western companies in China have terrible records on human rights. I'm a member of Amnesty International. So quite a few years ago, I was shocked to see this Amnesty International report about the role of Western companies in China. Cisco helped the Communist Party to build the Great Firewall on the internet in China to block Chinese people from accessing outside information. This Great Firewall built by Cisco also has this built-in function to trace down IPs of who is searching for TechMan to allow the police to find you at home. This is all the function of the Great Firewall. And Yahoo gave their email contents to the Chinese police. They said they had to follow the Chinese law. Unfortunately, quite a few dissidents in China, like reporters and activists, they used the Yahoo email to discuss their human rights projects. And this email exchange became evidence for the Chinese court to sentence them to 8 years, 10 years in prison. So we've seen many, many examples of these Western companies going to China. They saw like, okay, they can make money there, but actually they are putting Chinese people in a much worse situation. And I hope I can speak out for those Chinese people who cannot stand here today because they are not able to travel. They cannot tell you the story. I hope I can be the voice for the voiceless to be here today to speak. And I have a blog running some of the articles or recordings on my talks, especially the references. I know many of you here are professors and intellectuals. People often ask me, where did you get all this information? So that's why I put all the references on my blog. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I hope I can answer your questions afterwards. I hope I have enough time.
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You actually have another 15 minutes to speak if you would like.
I would rather save those for questions and answers.
Okay.
I was worried like this would be too long. I think he
So we're going to take some questions.
He
Dr.
raised
Chen, if we can wait, you wait to the microphone. We'll get him over here to the questions. You have one over there, Lynn? Okay.
There you go.
Right after this question.
Hi, Wen. Tom Corey, we met the other day. Thank you very much. Wonderful talk. It's scary. And a lot of people are probably wondering, what could we do about this? And the first thing that comes to my mind is boycotting Chinese goods, which would be basically not buying anything. Do you have any suggestions?
That is what I have been doing in the past decades, right? We try. I know it's hard. Like, I remember like 20 years ago, it was impossible to buy anything not made in China, but it's become easier and easier. Like nowadays, if I hesitate, if I should buy this dress, I would look at the label. If it's made in China, I say, okay, if I hesitate, I'm not going to buy it. But if it's made by the USA or another country, I may just buy it, right? So it's like these little efforts we can do. And I think one thing very important I would suggest people to do is to raise the awareness of human rights in China, because this is the most challenging part. Whenever I talk about human rights in China, I found that many Americans told me like they're not interested in this subject. This is too political, or they think China is doing great. Or maybe they have business in China, right? They don't want to hear about this. But this is so important when you talk about why we should not buy cheap products in China, why we should buy this like a 50-cent or $1 Christmas ornament made in China, right? It's so cheap, why shouldn't we buy this? But think about it, when you buy such cheap products made in China, you're consuming slave labor products. You made yourself part of this slave labor in China by buying these products. So this is the message I want people to spread. Like you don't have to give a lecture. Even if you have a party, right? You can tell your friends what you heard today. Then you're giving the best support to the Chinese people.
My son lives in Zhuhai, China. I was just there in October and I was amazed at all the cameras. So I'm on film all over this particular city. But he went to USC and there were a large number of Chinese students in the film program. So when he left USC, he was recruited to come into this university in Zhuhai that just teaches filmmaking. And one of the things he mentioned was his students had no information, knew nothing about Tiananmen Square. And you were talking about that, but I thought that was so interesting. And these are educated students. When they're in this program, they're in a graduate level program. But I have to say, I was so impressed by the city. I thought, this is a beautiful city. They had a beautiful apartment. I thought, I could live here, but it's different.
If they don't have a lockdown. You think about Shanghai, right? Many people moved to Shanghai before the pandemic. This is paradise. Life can't be better than Shanghai. Like it's such a beautiful city, so modern, right? And then in lockdown, you were not even allowed to buy food online. And then people get starved. And then they say, this is unbelievable. 21st century, you can die from starvation in a city like Shanghai. So this is a problem with China. Everything look perfect until the day you get you get slaughtered. Yes.
Two quick things. I saw some of you taking pictures of the slides. One has graciously given us permission to put it on our website, so you can download it from there.
Thank you.
And I told you I was going to ask you this. Do you think China will invade Taiwan?
Yes, I definitely think that's a plan of Xi Jinping, but I think it's more likely that China is buying Taiwan. Buying Taiwan. Okay, why buying Taiwan? Because Taiwan is very different from other countries. For example, the Chinese government wants to buy New York Times. It's not going to work, right? Because we will not allow a foreign government to buy a major media in the US. But Taiwan has a loophole because Taiwan officially is the Republic of China. According to its constitution, it still regards mainland China as part of its territory. So this loophole allows Chinese business owners to come to Taiwan to buy their media, buy their company, buy their university, become a big loophole. And nowadays, the Chinese government has heavily infiltrated into the media of Taiwan and also social media, so that can spread their propaganda and influence Taiwanese. And this is very important because people rely on media and social media to get news about their neighborhood, right? So during the election, right, these media would support the party that favored the CCP. As a matter of fact, the Conservative Party in Taiwan, Kuomintang, it is like equivalent to Conservative Party here, is very pro-China. They already openly announced that they wanted Xi Jinping to be their leader. And they lost the election this year. They didn't get a president position, but they did dominate the Congress. And because they took the Congress, they can, create a lot of barriers for the president. The president was never able to have any policy executed because Congress blocked everything. And this is what we say, buy Taiwan. Like if you can buy their media, if you can buy their university, buy their filmmaking industry, everything, and you can influence people there. And China is also actively recruiting Taiwanese young students to China, just like how they recruit Americans. But it's much easier to recruit Taiwanese students because they all speak Mandarin, right? And they pay these students very well to study in China. And many of them became agents, like they would advocate for China after they come back to Taiwan. And this is also how they influence the election in Taiwan. So I think this is more likely the plan of the Chinese government. And also why I think military, I'm not that worried, is also because the Chinese military is highly corrupted. You know how the defense minister of China all of a sudden disappeared a few years ago, right? Xi Jinping all of a sudden removed him. And then he promoted another person. That person also disappeared later because it was very corrupted. So I think military, I'm not that worried about it, although we do need to prepare for that. You never know if they may go crazy, right? All of a sudden start to invade Taiwan. But I think infiltration is more likely to happen. And this infiltration not only happen in Taiwan and the US, but also in many other countries. They are doing the same. In Australia, the Chinese government is manipulating the election in Australia and Canada as well through their local agents. Yeah.
My question. I worry about your safety. You have given us a great deal of inside information. I always knew that it was very bad for the average Chinese in that country. I didn't realize how bad. And I'm wondering, are you worried that you are going to be targeted for sharing the truth with us?
I have to be honest, when I first stepped out, it was in 2001 or so, I hesitated for a whole year whether I should do this or not do this. Because at that time, I already knew like if I speak out against the Communist Party, I will get into trouble. And my family in China will also get into trouble. But I did step out. I think I got into an interview by LA Times. They had a full-page picture of me. And I thought, okay, this is done deal, right? There's no way back. Let me just continue to do that, and I will not go back. So I have not visited China since 1998. I have not seen my brother for 27 years. My parents did to come visit me 3 times in the past, but they went back to China. They wanted to live with my brother. Also, like, you know, they're getting very old now. My mom is 87, my dad is 85, and they can no longer travel. So I call them every week. I think the most devastating news from my family is that my brother was arrested 15 months ago. He's a communist. He took the opposite path from me. You know, I came to the US, I became a human rights activist. My brother joined the Communist Party, and he climbed high in the government. And he did not talk to me for almost 30 years because he did not want me to get into his way. But he was arrested in January 2024 for 15 months. We still don't know where he's detained. We don't know what kind of crime he committed, but the government took everything. They took his money, they took his house. And I think the only conclusion we got now is that he probably is innocent. Otherwise, we would have known what kind of crime he committed, right? And very likely because of the political struggle nowadays, because every time you have a new Communist Party political force rising, they want to take down all the old people. And Xi Jinping does not like intellectuals. My brother got a PhD in economics in China, and he's like a principal economics researcher in Bank of China. But Xi Jinping probably wanted to replace him with his people. So the easy solution is to arrest them and say they committed crime and then get rid of them and put Xi Jinping's new crew there. So we believe that's what's happening to my brother. But I think to my family, this is the worst that we can imagine because my parents need care and my brother is gone and I cannot go back to see them. So I would see this is a price we pay for speaking out. That's why I say freedom is not free. This is a sacrifice we make in our family. And the best support you can give me is to spread the word and make all people speak out. I don't call myself a whistleblower. I want to call myself a whistle distributor. All of you that can blow whistle and support me. Thank you so much.
My question is, what do you think are the implications of China owning so much of the U.S. Debt to the world?
It's a good question. I think China does want to keep all these foreign currency, and they probably also think they own so much debt of your country, like they can better manipulate you. But I think they're selling this now. They're holding less than before now because I think they're running out of money. So I think like, if they really want to use this to threaten the US, they will also lose a lot of money. So I'm not too worried about it. I think the best strategy we can do now is gradually decouple with the Chinese economy. I think it's very important. I was very concerned during the pandemic. I realized that Americans rely so much on the medicine made in China, right? We rely on China to produce a lot of essential stuff like medical protection equipment. I think that's a big concern. And also like, we allow the Chinese companies to buy American food production company. That's also a concern because the Chinese government has been weaponizing all the products that they can control to threaten other countries, right? During the pandemic, 3M and Honeywell produced the face mask in China These are American companies produce face mask in China, but the Chinese government did not allow them to sell the mask to the US. They had to sell them to the Chinese government, and then the Chinese government sell them in US in like 10 times higher price with political conditions. So they can weaponize the product they can seize. If you allow Chinese companies, and many of them, there's no private company in China. If they can come to the US to buy land and buy our food production company, right? They have to follow the order of the Chinese government. Remember the national intelligence law, right? It's the same order. Like if we have a food shortage, these companies cannot sell their food to us because the Chinese government want to seize what they can control. So I think we do need to gradually decouple from the Chinese economy. Unfortunately, this is a step we must take. I hope like during this tariff war, these big companies will realize the risk and really move their supply chain out.
Hello, yes, thank you so much for your courage and the depth of your knowledge. My question is, how do you assess the state of US journalism covering the subjects you've been talking about, particularly North Korea? The paid advertisement aside, are we getting what we need from US media to cue us in on this? And if not, why do you think not?
It's hard because not only the Chinese government is buying advertisement, they are actually inviting journalists to China for red carpet treatment. We're talking about corruption, right? If you work for a major news outlet in the US, they will invite you to China to give you a very nice, hotel, dinner, women, and they can influence you. And once you fall into this trap, like you will always write articles favored by this regime, because indeed people get brainwashed when you go to these countries. It's like so nice, but you live in a bubble once you go to this red carpet treatment, right? Like you may give a tour to the headquarters of Huawei, and everyone you see in the tour are so supportive to the Communist Party. They live such a wonderful life. You live in a bubble of propaganda once you go to these tours, these trips in China. And you will come back with a very, very positive impression about the Chinese government, because you have no opportunity to access real Chinese people, like my brothers, my brother, like my husband's siblings. You will never be able to talk to them when you're in China because they put you in this bubble. They monitor you all the time. Wherever you go, they have a tour guide following you. Make sure you don't talk to the wrong person. And unfortunately, this is a trap they're setting to journalists. And if this journalist is very willingly accept this kind of, then basically there's nothing we can do. It's very hard. Like if you speak the truth, you will be sanctioned by the Chinese government, right? Like me. So I think we're facing a very, very sad situation in our media or social media. They're also influence YouTubers, right? They would invite YouTubers to China. Many YouTubers nowadays make videos about Xinjiang, about Uyghurs, say how wonderful Uyghurs live in China, to whitewash the genocide, the concentration camp in China. So we are facing a very challenging situation in the United States.
Over here.
Yes.
So China is inviting lots of well-educated people to go to China and live there, teach there, do what they do. These people understand how things operate outside of China, and now they're in China. How does China handle the fact that they know all this other information that China is hiding? And do these people get into trouble, or is it just a matter of time and they're brainwashed? How does all that work?
Yes, many of these, I know there are many people going to China to teach English, right? So basically every individual visiting China face a choice, right? Do you want to speak the truth? Do you want to listen to the truth, or you are really willingly accept the propaganda, want to be part of it? I have to tell you, if they can use you, they will pay you very, very well. I've heard about a Caltech PhD graduates going to China and work for Chinese Central Television Station to create programs to praise the Communist Party. Obviously, he's very, very well paid. So yes, it's hard to say no to when they're paid well, when they can make a very good life there. And if I've also heard about those people going to China to spread Christianity and to outreach to the underground churches and spread Christianity in China, they could get into trouble. They get disappeared, like my brother. So every individual, every American going to China will face such a choice. Do you want to be part of the regime or you want to be part of the people, right? If you want to be part of the people, then you get into trouble. And that's why there's always warnings by the US government, like not to travel to North Korea or China, country like that, because you have the risk of being forcibly disappeared. And also sometimes, even if you do not do anything, right, they may just make you a hostage. Like, if they want to reach a goal, have a negotiation, a deal with the US government and say, oh, we take some of your people. You can just give them anything. Okay, they smuggled a drug or anything, because there's no press freedom. They can say whatever, right, once they arrest you. So there's a lot of risk by going to China. But as I said, like each individual makes their own choice, whether you want to be part of the regime or part of the people.
Dr. Chen, how do you communicate with family members over there? Outside of being very careful, but is there I would imagine everything that you think or do, you have to assume that it's going to be out there.
Yeah, when I call my parents, I cannot tell them anything I do. We just talk about daily business, like what we're making for dinner today, what is growing in the garden, what is our kids studying, and like we cannot tell them anything sensitive. But when my relatives come to visit me, like my husband's sister is visiting us now for several months, like they are going to see, we're going to tell them a lot, and they are going back to China. We're visiting my parents and tell them what they learned here. Yeah, we have to be very careful because I know the phone is always tapped. I remember during the pandemic in February 2020, I called my aunt in China, in Shanghai. She lives in Shanghai. At that time, the news we heard from the official media is like Shanghai only had 4 cases of COVID. I asked my aunt, are you okay? How about the COVID in Shanghai? My aunt is on the phone. Oh, someone in our building got ill. He had COVID. Before she finished the sentence, the phone was cut. Boom. And then I called her back, and neither of us dared to say anything about the COVID again. We know someone was listening. It was probably automatic. It was probably like artificial intelligence, right? They can automatically detect someone is discussing COVID, and then they just cut the phone automatically.
Oh, Dr. Chen.
You need the microphone.
One more question. I know that you work in biology and you do a lot of research and you also employ AI. When do you think we're going to see AGI?
What is AGI?
Like artificial general intelligence, where AI makes its own decisions.
AI makes some decisions. I think there's a lot of legal issues here, right? Like if you have AI, well, this is not related to China. I just quickly answer you. I think AI, we have a big problem. It's like you need to hold someone accountable. Like for example, if a doctor give you a prescription, right? The doctor is held accountable. If you die, he's responsible for that. If you let AI give you the prescription, no one is accountable. So I think we do have the problem. Like if you have AI, a human must be the final person say yes or no to approve it. We always need that. At this time, I think ChatGPT or these like this kind of AI may help you writing, but we cannot trust them to make decision. They can help us to narrow the assumptions and eventually help us to save some time to make a decision. But we still have to make decision as human being because human can take responsibility for what they do, but a machine cannot. But okay, let's focus on China and North Korea because what I'm here for.
I wanted to ask a question, Dr. Chen. This is Iris. about the relationship between Russia and China, and also Russia having similar surveillance throughout their country.
Yeah.
Isn't that, could you speak about that?
Yeah, so China has been supporting Russia during this Ukraine war for sure. But superficially, English media, right? China said, oh, it's neutral. But on all Chinese media, on all Chinese social media, if you support Ukraine, you'll be sanctioned. So China officially supports Russia on the Chinese media, Chinese language media, and has been exporting all these technology to Russia that they can use for military uses. But these totalitarian regimes, they have tricky relationship. It's like they're mafias, right? They're all mafias. So mafias usually do not trust each other. They're not like normal friends like you guys. Mafia, they just use each other. And so Russia does not want to become, like what we say, they do not want China to take over. They do not, North Korea does not want China to take over either. Like Kim Jong-un just said, he hates Chinese because China, although gives them all the support, China wants to turn him into a puppet ruler. No one wants to be a puppet ruler, right? And same thing is Russia. Russia wants to keep itself dominant in the region. So you can see it's very interesting. I think we know these regimes are bad. But if you talk about the foreign policy, if you talk about the military, and you really need a strategy, right? You don't want to group these bad people together and make them powerful. So I kind of now start to feel that it makes sense if you can kind of drag North Korea out of this circle of Russia and China. If you can separate them, it will make it easier for us to deal with them later. That's all I can provide.
I wanted to know more about the Uyghurs. What is the situation with them?
So Uyghur, it's a minority group, live in northwestern China in a province we call Xinjiang. So, China has 56 ethnic groups, and Uyghur is one of them, and also Tibetans and Mongolians. And to the Chinese government, I think the most they hate about these minority groups, they all have their own culture. They have their traditional value. And all these traditional value are similar, just like Western traditional value, like you're honest and you trust each other, you serve your parents, you respect your family, what is right, what is wrong. And to all of this, according to the Chinese government, these are threats to the authorities' propaganda system. Remember how they had a cultural revolution to destroy the Chinese culture, how they targeted Falun Gong to destroy traditional Chinese meditation? They feel the same way when they face Uyghurs or Tibetans or Mongolians. If these people speak their own language, have their own culture, have their own value, it's impossible to brainwash them. And this is a key reason that the Chinese government try to eliminate their culture. And of course, Uyghurs will not want you to eliminate their culture, right? Many of them are intellectuals. So the Chinese government started a systematic eradication towards Uyghur in 2015 or so, because they started to systematically sterilize Uyghur women to have less children. They also forced Uyghur women to marry Chinese, Han Chinese, to dilute their bloodline. And they also recruited a Uyghur elite to live in Beijing. So these are Uyghur people, but they were raised as Han Chinese. And they are heavily brainwashed by the Communist Party, and they would speak for the Communist Party. But the majority of Uyghurs living in Xinjiang, in their home place, home area, the Chinese government built several concentration camps in Xinjiang, put several million Uyghurs there. They become slave laborers. Chinese government also exported these Uyghur laborers, they're men, right, to other provinces to work as slave labor. So Uyghurs are facing very bad situation now in China, especially when you talk about forced organ harvesting. Chinese government escalated that to Falun Gong in 1999. Then they started targeting Uyghurs in 2015 or so. The Chinese government already blood type tested and DNA tested 100% of Uyghurs. So every Uyghur went through blood test, and the government tested their DNA. DNA is important for organ match, because if you know their genomic sequence, you know which one will match you the best. So Uyghurs, unfortunately, are also now the target of the forced organ harvesting, because wealthy patients in countries in Middle East prefer halal organs from people who never ate pork. So they prefer Uyghurs organ. So that's one of the reasons I think that Chinese government targeted them. And it's very important, like we spread words like this. Yes?
Thank you, Dr. Chen, for your courageous work and the most brilliant talk I've heard on China, where I've been involved for 35 years. My question is, I used to have people, I was there recently after Tiananmen, and I had government officials apologize to me for what happened. I've had scientific colleagues who admitted that they had marched on Tiananmen, but subsequently, because they're such brilliant scientists, that was pushed under the rug. Do you see any cracks in either North Korea and in China that in the future might usher in change?
Definitely. China is having a huge human rights movement now. And they started from the persecution towards Falun Gong, because the strategy of the Chinese government is that they would only target less than 5% of population each time, and tell the rest of 95% that you join the party, you persecute this 5%, then you're okay. And that worked very well during the Cultural Revolution and afterwards. People always join the government to persecute the minorities. But when Falun Gong, when the government started to persecute Falun Gong in 1999, millions of Falun Gong practitioners went to public to support their fellow practitioners who were detained. And because according to the Falun Gong's teaching, truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, people believe that you should step out when you see injustice. And that scene lasted for quite a few years in public, really shocked the Chinese community. And after Falun Gong turned underground in 2001 or so, in the past decades, they have been spreading like flyers and DVDs and talk to their neighbors, and especially spread like softwares to bypass the Great Firewall. Falun Gong practitioners formed 3 companies in the US to write free softwares to help Chinese people to bypass the Great Firewall and to find out what's going on around the world in China. Nowadays, about 30% of internet users in China regularly bypass the information blockage. So that truly awoke Chinese people from propaganda. And nowadays, I say very few people in China believe in communism. People join the party to make a living. Because if you're not a party member, you make $300 per month, right? Once you join the party, you make 100 times more money per month. So people join the party, not because they like communism, but because they want to make a living. And many people nowadays know, China has no freedom. They started to support the victims. They started to sign petitions to support victims. They started to file lawsuits against the corrupted officials. And China also started this massive trend of quitting the Communist Party. People would send a statement over the internet through the VPNs, say, I want to quit the party, I want to quit the Communist Party's Youth League and Young Pioneers. And there's such a huge trend of quitting the party now. So I do see the hope there. When the Soviet Union collapsed, right? It just almost like collapsed overnight. But people did not realize this has been going on for decades. People abandoned communism, and all of a sudden, when the time is ripened, right, it just happened. So I think the same thing will happen in China. We're seeing this happen, and more Chinese are stepping out. And I was very encouraged by this white paper protest at the end of the pandemic, like 2020, I think, the fall of 2020. Young Chinese students, they protested for the China's COVID-0 policy by holding a piece of white paper, saying nothing. They just stood. And a blank paper, yeah. And then like that actually forced Xi Jinping to end the COVID-0 policy. That's very, very encouraging.
And our last question.
Okay. I heard that Chinese people are really good savers, their money. And I heard that they don't have like a 401k or anything like that over there. So it's just the savings for themselves, okay? with the one-child policy back then, that means that they've accumulated some money, maybe a house. So is that why the Chinese want to get rid of the old people? You said they want to get rid of the old people.
Well, I said like my brother was arrested because the new political leader want to get rid of the previous political leaders' people. That's what I say. But now I want to say the one-child policy you mentioned, Chinese people are very good at savings because the government would not like provide the support like we are having here now, right? So people rely on themselves to support themselves. So they would save every penny they can. But it's very hard because the government of China purposely made the housing price high. Think about like in a big city in China, $30 million, like, to buy a house. So, but like you have to think like in reality, people have to put all their money into their property. Like, even in a smaller city, it would require like a whole family saving. Everyone will need to work to put in the house. So actually they don't have much savings at hand because all the money got into their house. So this is a big problem in China because the government purposely made the housing price high to take the money from people. Even, they already paid very low. So in reality, they don't have much money. Parents. And the consequence of one-child policy, there are two serious consequences. Number one is that now they have very few young people to support their older people. Like a young couple need to support 4 parents and like 8 grandparents. Like it's just make life very hard. That's why young Chinese people nowadays do not want to have kids because they cannot afford to have kids. Although China already opened up and allow you to have 3 children, very few people want to have 3 children. They don't even want to get married because we cannot afford to get married or have children. And this is a consequence of one-child policy. Another serious consequence is the loss of balance between women, the sex ratio, because Chinese culture is like once a boy, once a daughter gets married, she belongs to the boy's family, right? Like the husband's family. And then her parents would have no one to take care of them because government would not take care of them. So everyone wants to have a boy so that someone will take care of them when they get old, right? So that's why like there's a huge abortion of baby girls versus baby boys. And now China has a shortage of 34 million women. When we're talking about 34 million men cannot find wives, that create a huge social problem because we're talking about human trafficking, right? Girls from the city got kidnapped and taken to the countryside and sold to countrymen as wives or prostitutes. And local government allowed that to happen. They would give marriage certificates and new identification to these trafficked women so that, the men can keep them at home. Usually they are locked up and raped every night until they have babies. And the local government allowed that to happen because they saw that as a solution. Because they say, what are we going to do with all these men cannot find wives? They make trouble, right? Now they can have their wives. They're happy. Then this is a solution. This is a terrible problem caused by the one-child policy.
Dr. Chen, thank you so much for this informative, earth-shaking symposium. I want to thank you for coming here. I want to remind you we will have a break for Mother's Day next week. Happy Mother's Day to everybody. And we will see you in 2 weeks for 6th Street Playhouse. Thank you so much.